Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Al-Fatihi lima ughliq wal khatim lima sabaq. Nasir al-haq bil-haq wal hadi ila siratikal mustaqim wa ala alihi haqqa qadrihi wa miqdaril azim. We're very happy that we are continuing the very famous, very popular Facebook Live lecture with Dr. Faris Hajamaidin and Faizan Shah, and tonight is the final, you could say the final session of our series this entire month for this topic on the history and theory of architectural Islam, the body, image, and spirit of place. Right, and our guests are none other than Dr. Faris Hajamaidin and Faizan Shah. Tonight, we'll have Faizan Shah who will give his lesson, his dars, and then in the end, inshallah, for the question and answer segment, we'll have both of them on the screen, and you can actually pose your questions that you have to both of them. And the number to send your questions to will be +65 8776 7706. That's +65 8776 7706. Dr. Faris Hajamaidin is director of the School of Architecture and the Built Environment at the Singapore Polytechnic, where he has been teaching history and theory of ideas since 2002. He completed his master's degree at McGill University School of Architecture and his PhD at the University of Adelaide Centre for Asian and Middle Eastern Architecture. His main research interest has been the study of the human body as a site for architectural imaginings, with a special focus on the relationship between Vitruvius's De Architectura and Platonic philosophy. Recently, he has studied the relationship of body and building in the works of the 12th century Muslim illuminationist Ishraqi Shihab al-Din al-Surawardi. He has written, taught, and presented invited talks on this topic. Faizan Shah is a lecturer and year coordinator at Singapore Polytechnic's Diploma in Interior Design, leading the Generative Design Atelier and teaching history and theory of ideas in across 3 years in the course. He completed his bachelor's in architectural design at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, RMIT, Australia, and Master of Architecture at Universität Innsbruck in Austria. He developed interest in the complexities of engaging architecture with focus on the poetical and representational through theory and the instruments of perception. And without further ado, we would like to invite Faizan Shah to begin on the first part of the lecture series. Bismillah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Abu. And with that, I think I will start the lecture. And I will share my screen. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa al-Fatih al-Mawlid al-Qatil ma sabaq nazil al-haq bil-haq wa siratika mustaqim wa huwa alihi haqqa qadrihi min ali azim. Praises be to our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the beloved and the key and the master of our universe. So this is a continuation of where we left off about 2 weeks ago, and this final installment, which was supposed to due last week, right? So this image here is to put in context of the call and also the placement of the locality of the sacred sanctity in Islam, right? So just a bit of a context here why the mystery of the Kaaba by Peter Sanders takes center stage in the first slide. But just to come around where we left off, this demarcation here was a part that I left off in the last lecture. So in here, Syed Hussein Nasir wrote that to distinguish between Islamic sacred art and traditional Islamic art, if we can sort of like come back to this, bring it to context, that the sacred arts relate directly to the central practices of the religion and the practice of the spiritual life. So it is to say, and it is to put into, again, to recontextualize what we have discussed thus far, is that art here again, this is my sort of like effacement on this. When we talk about art, it talks about everything that is all encompassing. So likewise with the religion itself, the practice, it is all encompassing and it should be emanating into our lives, right? This practice. So embracing such arts as calligraphy, mosque architecture, and even the recitation of the Quran Traditional Islamic art, however, embraces every form of the visual and surreal arts, from landscaping to poetry, in a bowl here, all of which, being traditional, also reflect the principles of Islamic revelation and Islamic spirituality, but more in an indirect manner. So this comes to a very critical point, that to distinguish Islamic art from everything else is this very point here, that in the sense that sacred art is in the heart of the traditional art, right? But more importantly, the true source of Islamic art is Islamic revelation itself, and not the historical precedents or influences. So it is not about the proceedings or the precedents over a period of time. It's not being historical. It is not being a kind of how history as we know it, right? So the point of revelation, and that is to say that the whole segment, or to believe in Islam, is to believe in the point of existence from the beginning and to where we are right now, right? And to say that even and the role of Prophet ﷺ is plays a huge part in our deen, and also in our experiences. So that has effects to how we see and view what is known as Islamic arts in general. So this singular origin accounts for its remarkable unity across time and space, and that differentiates what Islamic art is, was, and will be. So it is difficult to formalize Islamic art as to be recognized easily, especially by those familiar with other dimensions of the Islamic tradition. So it is quite varied, and it is quite diverse, and that we know, right? So we had discussions previously that it is not just about, let's say, arabesque calligraphy. It's not about, let's say, only about Kufic mosaic patterns, and we know that's not it, right? Because you can see that there is this kind of diffusion of what Islamic art is, are, and were across different traditions and across different practices of Muslims around the world. So the Islamic arts project unity, or Tawheed, which manifests as symmetry, harmony, and rhythm. And this is the imprint of unity on multiplicity. So the notion of Tawheed is sort of like revealed, because you know the oneness of God, and it is not in that oneness in the meaning of the singular form. It is actually the meaning that there is this omnipotent presence of God, right? To believe and to have Tawheed is actually to understand that this unity is applied in multiplicity. You see God and His effects and His greatness and His grandeur everywhere, and everything else refers back to Him. And this is an important point, right? The unity of multiplicity and the implications of Tawheed, which is central to the religion. So the Islamic arts do not mimic or imitate the outward forms of things, but present the inner archetypal realities. So hence the emphasis of number, for example, which leads to geometry, the one that most of us will be quite enthralled with, and letters calligraphy, the mastery of the letters, right? Which are the basic building blocks of time, space, and language. And this is very important. And knowing, you can have a reading at different levels in this. Even the first revelation of the surah, right? The prophet was in with the archangel Jibril alayhi salam, and it is, it can be read that Iqra, to read, to recite, is to know the revealed language or the revealed letters, and from then on knowledge will come upon you. So this is a kind of a tradition or an emphasis that we draw upon, and the archetypal realities that we sought or we seek to represent are always about the truth, like the getting to the higher reality. What is the truth? What can be best represented in here in the craft, in the art, and I'm just drawing towards what readings we can get on from there on. So, for example, in traditional calligraphy, geometric ratios govern even the shapes and sizes of the letters, and which gives the lettering art its repertory harmony. Right. So there is a kind of a reverence to, let's say, the script that is being used to represent Quranic verses. Right. It is not haphazard. It is not something that we meddle with. It's revered. It is an art in its own right. Right. So, and it has developed with time. It has developed with certain people of tradition, right? For example, the Kandusi script, the ones that we know, Kufik, and so on. So there is a sense that it can relate back to Revelation. It can relate this harmony. It is something that is relatable to a reality that is beyond us, beyond the mind can perceive. So Islamic art is founded on the interconnectedness of sacred sciences, of mathematics, geometry, music, and cosmology. Of course, this is a generalization, but this generalization it is the string that binds it. It cannot exist without, and in my opinion, it cannot exist without the other. It has to be, it has to link up. It has to have a kind of a string that binds this together. So geometry will give a rhythm and harmony, and that can, you can use phrases, you can use that template for music. And with music, we can talk about the lyrics. We can talk about a kind of a resonance to when you listen, it brings you to a different state, cosmology, right? So in that sense, it is quite intuitive, but it has to be stated, right? It is interconnected, it is linked. So similarities can be drawn to a medieval Christian notion of arsene scientia nihil est, that art without science is nothing. It is not to say that we are alone in this, right? Even the Christian tradition has a kind of parallel to mention that the art, if it's not with the sciences, and in sciences, of course, it is what we mentioned here that can be related to sacred science. It amounts to nothing, right? It is futile. So all of these sciences connected or connect the multiplicity of creation to the unity of the creator and engage in the qualitative, symbolic aspects of multiplicity. I'm sorry for that, and as well as the quantitative dimensions. So again, the role of the creator and the unity of everything else relates back to the qualitative and the quantitative, right, in the multiplicity. So it is not just one dimensional. That is, you could say that it's just not about the unseen. It's about things that you can see, things that you can actually account for, things that you can actually sort of like tangible, right? Not about things that you can only perceive in the eye of the mind. And this is unique. Again, this is unique to our tradition. That if you really put your mind to this, right, there is not almost not anything that is revealed upon us that we can't relate something to, right? I think Dr. Faris previously did speak about the Kaaba being an archetypal unit, right? The purity of the cube. But we know from the teachings that there is a larger Kaaba that is invisible to us, where the angels, you know, do their tawaf, right? So there is always something that we draw upon, and this string sort of like leads back to a higher reality, right? The one that is for the creator, for him, right? And our work here in the terras, in the earthly domain, is to sort of like interpret and work our hands to find the meaning. And when we say meaning, it doesn't necessarily mean the truth, but we work towards that, right? In terms of crafts and art. So Aristotle divided philosophy into three parts, like physics, mathematics, and theology, or ilahiyat, as the translation in Arabic. So to address this, physics addresses the natural or the material world, as we know, and theology, the divine, while mathematics and the associated sciences of geometry and music, which are numbers in space and time, in the visual and sonoral domains, respectively, deals with the intermediate, the archetypal, the imaginal realm, the barzakh. So again, with the term here, it has a kind of a misinterpretation, just like the term previously I used or introduced was khayal, right? So the barzakh here, maybe I could explain a bit more. So in this sense, it is the imaginal realm where the archetypal would exist, but in terms of what is revealed upon us, right? So the barzakh is the realm between the divine and the terrestrial. So these sciences of the intermediate realm allow the Islamic arts to serve as a conduit from the terrestrial to the celestial, and from the sensory to the spiritual. And they also have their foundation in Islamic metaphysics and spirituality, which give the artist direct access to these spiritual realities and truths represented in the art. So you can see that art is being used here as a means of navigating between the terrestrial and the celestial, and the sensory to the spiritual, right? So, but this is still on the generalization of how Islamic art is different from the art of everything else, right? So it serves as a conduit for this very purpose. So that is to say that Islamic art is quite significant, um, as a mediator between, in a sense, the sensory and the spiritual. So Plato describes the beauty as a splendor of the true. The inability to discern between beauty and ugliness, therefore, corresponds to and accompanies the inability to discern between the truth, al-haq, and the false. So in this definition here, right, the truth is beautiful, right? And this we can't disagree, right? But it is also important to realize that how do you know what beauty is, right? If the truth, al-haq, is something that we know as truly beautiful, then we also need to identify and have the ability to discern between what is false. And you see that, you know, beauty is attributed to the truth, while false is therefore attributed to the ugliness of things. And this is a dialectic which is also central to our tradition, right? So the Prophet Islam, for example, it is it's accepted and it is known that in everything about him, it is the perfection, right? Al-Insan Al-Kamil, the perfect being, and everything else, it is a remnant of that, right? And it's not to say that everything is, it is a way, there are degrees of this kind of like effusion. So back to this, so harmonious and geometric, true beauty is timeless, and it reflects the beauty of the unseen, leading to tranquility and the remembrance of God. So if you see something beautiful, and of course, you say, Alhamdulillah, perhaps it reverts you back to the Creator, even though the effusion here is a creation. And I use creation in terms of a kind of a metaphysical explanation, or a metaphysical tag to this, right? For everything else is a creation from the Creator. So false beauty, like ugliness, is fleeting, is temporal, discordant, unbalanced, reflecting the chaos, multiplicity of the lower world, of the lower realm, the lower levels of the human psyche, which leads to imbalance, dispersion, heedlessness, like ghafla. So you can relate back to a diagram that was, I think it was the Ikhwan Safa's diagram of the different realms of being, right, from the animal and what central is to man itself. So it brings out the opaque aspect of creation that hides or veils the divine. So when we speak about the lower world and the lower levels of our experience, this is something that I think the truth is something that it is beyond us, right? It is beyond us, and beauty, it is only a kind of a fraction. What we deem is as beauty, or what we deem as beautiful, is only a fraction of this this diffusion, right? This aspect of creation that actually it is veiled between the seer and what is being seen. True beauty brings out the transparent or reflective aspect of things that make them legible as signs of God. And that is the true nature of an aspiration of finding out this kind of archaeology of work towards the creation of something that is truly beautiful. Right? So at this juncture, it brings us to a point that we realize that beauty in Islamic arts is actually kind of like very far off from in the whole schema of things, right? It is just a small fragment of trueness towards that, right? Even so, to say that, even to see what is the most beautiful thing that you've seen, and knowingly, we know that that is not the true beauty of what could be possible to be seen, right? Because it is just there is more to that. So where does this place the rest of us, right? As mortal beings. So the Islamic arts are many and diverse, as I mentioned. They can be roughly categorized into two domains, which is adab and ambience. Well, ambience denotes where arts of languages or language that and those that create the environment and locality in which people live, for example, clothing, architecture, urban design, and its effects. While adab, on the other hand, is the recognition and acknowledgement of the reality that knowledge and being are ordered in hierarchy according to the various grades and degrees of rank. And and of one's proper place in relation to that reality and to one's physical, intellectual, and spiritual capacities and potential. So this is where I bring Sayyid Naqib al-Achas, and I think there's no other who can explain adab better than this definition here of his, is that why adab is very important, because in this definition it says that to really acknowledge and to really know something. For example, in the context that I place, if you really want to know what beauty is, then it is actually the placement of the one's physical, intellectual, spiritual capacities and potential. So it is actually one's proper place in relation to that reality, and that placement, that locality plays an important role in our tradition, in our belief, in that sense, in every aspect of our life. Like, how would you know if something is truly beautiful if you are not placed or in that sense, right? In this definition, and everything else, and especially knowledge, reality of that knowledge and being, are ordered in hierarchy. So there's a rank in grading that knowledge and that knowing, and I think that is something that is unique and also attributed to our understanding of our tradition. So,
Sorry, Zan, can I jump in a little bit just to
of course,
augment what is it?
yeah.
The previous slide. I thought this is quite remarkable because you mentioned Plato, right? Previously on the notion of truth and false, and Plato, you're absolutely right, connected the notion of truth to beauty, right? But truth was also reality for him, and exactly what Professor Naqib al-Attas is talking about. They are orders, right? So for Plato, that which is the most beautiful is the most real, and the most real is the unchanging, right? So in our parlance, it will be God, but for him, he won't mention it because he's a philosopher, right? And then it's all about the closest approximation, right? So cosmos is the closest approximation of the unchanging. So he would say those who keep an eye on the unchanging cosmos, right? Because that's the only thing that's perceptible of God, and then use that as a guide to make things, they make the beautiful things. I'm paraphrasing him here, right? And one of the, I mean, there's several knowledge, the systems that you can draw from the cosmos, and the deepest knowledge is exactly what Prof. Attas is talking about, is hierarchy, is understanding how things are to be placed in the position they are supposed to be placed, right? So I just thought I wanted to make that connection because it is nicely really flowing through, right? In the way things are supposed to be put in order. And it is in the contemplation and, creating atmospheres for us to think and make in relationship to the highest reality, God, the cosmos, and exactly what you've said here, that one understands his intellectual and spiritual capacities and potentials. Sorry, I just thought that it's really lovely how things are just connecting here between the traditions. Yeah, thanks.
Interesting. And I use ambience, but I think, like you mentioned, I think Atmos was something that I think that is something that could be revisited. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Faris. So continuing from that, I think Naqib al-Attas's definition and imploration of adab refers to a specific hadith here that translates itself to, my Lord has instilled adab in me, adabani, so made my education ta'adib most excellent, right? So Al-Attas, Professor Al-Attas meticulously translated the verb adabani in that hadith as has educated me, and has rendered ta'adib as education. So hence, my Lord has educated me, and so made my education most excellent. And of course, if you and I've sort of like reread his writings, and that has a lot. Education in general has got a lot to do about on the positioning of how this could be seen, and this could be sort of like relate to how we see the world, and to view things, right? And that is, I mean, of course it goes without saying, but to contextualize how adab plays a very big role, and a huge and immense kind of like reverence in our tradition. So recognition is knowing against to recognize one's primordial covenant with the Lord, right? And everything that follows from it. In Surah Al-Araf, which is Bala Shahidina, to adhere and to say yes. So it also means that matters and things are already in their respective proper places in the various orders of being in existence. When we say Bala, in this declaration, and again with like what Faris is trying to also expand here, the orders are unchanged. It is already there. It is in existence, right? And therefore, hence with comes the fusion of everything else. Acknowledgement is requisite action in conformity of what is recognized. It is affirmation and confirmation or realization and then actualization in oneself of what is recognized. So without acknowledgement, education is nothing and is mere learning ta'alum. So it is just expanding of adab and then into knowledge and educating oneself to gain this knowledge, and then to perceive, right? You need to affirm. So in that sense, we have already affirmed where we are in the alam roh, and confirmation, and then realization and actualization is where it would lie in the mortal realm. Right? So it's a process of recognizing oneself towards truth. The significance of the above meanings of adab here, as they relate to the education of a good man or good person, is further underlying when it is realized that the recognition which involves knowledge and acknowledgement which involves action of proper places explained above are related to the other terms in Islamic worldview, such as wisdom, the eventual wisdom, hikmah, justice, working on justice across adl, and reality and truth, al-haq. And again, this goes hand in hand, right? It is unchanged. Reality and truth is defined as both the correspondence and coherence with the right and proper place. And this is kind of like a piece in the puzzle where you can see, or you can relate to the experience of understanding a ayah, for example, right? And we have experienced that it would have not made sense if you don't understand firstly how to read the letters, and then you sort of like make up the understanding of those letters, and then with, for example, with deeper understanding of people of tafsir and so on, you realize that there are multiple meanings, and these meanings are again part of revelation to oneself, and works into a kind of an experience of reality or truth, reworking of the self. And this is a common theme, or a recurring theme to what we are discussing thus far. The adi, the one who knows and respects adab, is the wise mind. Again, this is from Ibn Arabi reappearing here. In the Quran, the teaching of wisdom, hikmah, often goes along with the revelation of the book. Ibn Arabi, for his part, gives a definition and classification of adab, which underlines his close relations with the Quran. So just to read off a part of his writing here, know and may God assist you that God says, and He is with you wherever you may be. Quran verse 7. Thus, the adib is with everyone by the capacity which he has embraced all things. He comports himself with each spiritual station according to the station, with each state according to the state, and the same way for each virtue and aim. The adib unites himself, the noble virtues, makarim al-akhlaq. He knows the ignoble ones without qualifying himself by them. So in this definition here, the adib or the person who or the wise man, right, who knows and respects his placement, goes from one station to another station according to the state and with his virtues and his aim. So the way we would actually experience the way that one of the adib here would actually see the world, the signs, right, will be in accordance to the station or the maqam that he will be in, right? So in that sense, again, it is quite a shift in the lens of the paradigm of anything that enthralls or entails the Islamic worldview that's represented by Islamic arts. He embraces all degrees of praiseworthy and blameworthy knowledge, for there is nothing, knowledge of which is not preferable to ignorance of any man endowed with intelligence. Adab then is bringing together of good, right? Jima al khair. So it's bringing together the good. In a sense, it is could be attributed to beauty. Once again, right. So that is a kind of extension of what I think adab is, right. So back to the context of Islamic arts. All of the Islamic arts exist to support the supreme art, which is the purification of the soul, the cultivation of character, and the remembrance of God. As the Prophet said, I was sent only to perfect the beauty of character. So in particular, beauty, in particular the notion of a person, it is valued by his or her character. So Islamic arts have practical, psychological, and spiritual function. So circling back to this point here, Islamic arts are not a luxury. It serves as an essential support for for that art which is the essence of Islamic law, theology, and indeed the entire tradition itself. The realization of the full potential of the human state, reflecting the entire cosmos through this, to the fact that the main role of humanity is as Khalifa, right, through the remembrance of God. And this is a profound point that sort of like comes to sort of funnel back in that it is representative to our role, right, to represent the tradition, and in everything else is to remember God and the Creator. So they are the gates which we can access the deepest truths of the cosmos, the revelation, and of course ourselves. In traditional Islamic cosmology and metaphysics, multiplicity and difference govern the outward world of appearances, whereas unity increases, the farther ones travel inwards, right, and the world of meaning and spirit. So this to say that the world of appearances we could accept as what it is, right? Whereas we can see that there's a range of the varied outcomes of what the Islamic tradition could come up with, but the unity increases further, or the knowingness of Tawheed increases further when one travels inwards into the real meaning of things and into one's spirit. So because God is one, the approach, one approaches the divine presence, apparently becomes to the unity of things, right? And it becomes obvious. Those without access to this unity are unable to perceive and participate in harmony. So it's on the outside, right? The reflection of unity and simplicity that links the world of appearances to that of the realities that is out there. So in that sense, you need to get access to this, right? And to have this access, it is through the remembrance of God and through the action of cleansing of the soul. Imagination and the arts are bridges that unite these two worlds. And how does one get across this bridge? So Ibn Arabi illustrates that different branches and instances of knowledge actually reflect one reality, much like in his words, water varies in depending on its location. So in Fusus al-Hikam, alluding to the Quranic verse describing different waters as pleasant and sweet tasting versus salty and bitter tasting, Ibn Arabi argues that the differences in water taste are due to the differences in the places where the water stands, right? Yet water itself is one reality. So the truth or the reality is that it is water in itself, but where the water stands or where it is located, right? So locality in relation to the stations where a person could be or an adib could be placed at would then attribute to the experience of pleasant or sweet tasting or salty and bitter tasting, right? So Ibn Arabi uses that analogy to sort of like explain why water has one reality, right? Hakika wahida, oneness of that reality could be experienced differently. So the various limbs and sensory organs too possess knowledge specific to them, even though the reality they observe is one. So we know there's oneness of everything, right? In everything there's one. But there is the variation of possessed knowledge and how we view things based on this instance or example. So each organ of perception knows things according to its own capacity and preordained inclination. That is, their taste will differ. So your experience of viewing, right, or looking at what beauty is, or the notion of beauty, is actually differentiated based on the person from one person to one person. So with that, in truth, however, there are different sorts of knowledge which the organs have access, and there are various perspectives of one reality. Since the branches of knowledge are unique to each organ, ultimately lead to one unified source. So nonetheless, it will still lead to one unified source, but how or when and the methods of perception, the organs of perception, as I would say, differ, right? Because it has its own capacity and preordained inclinations, and that needs to be tuned. Moreover, it not only is the perceived in all actuality is one, but the perceiver, that is the human soul, combines these disparate reports of each organ into one perceived reality, that the soul as perceiver is also one. So in this diagram here, you can see that the vision of the adib could be split or could be diverged into two, right? Pure meaning spirit that is unbounded, or you could see that it could be just looking at the matter, right? The boundaries of form, the shape of things, the figurative aspect of, of the being, right? Of which in this, right, the imagination, right, the isthmus that conjoins, and it actually contains the both. In truth, it contains both, but we or there are possibilities to see the divergence of these two realms at any one time. It depends on one's own capacity, right? So using Ibn Arabi is the organ of perception, or the preordained inclinations, right? But the soul as a perceiver is also one. And this is an important thing here. It is not so much of the organ in terms of a kind of a archaeological Foucauldian organ kind of medical term. But more importantly, you see that the declaration or the acceptance, the notion of the bala, which is the soul as a perceiver, would have already acknowledged and perceived in the realm of the ruh, right? Would have acknowledged and would have already kind of like preordained, would have already given the effusion of the preordained, right, of this knowledge. So again, discernment, recognizing deeds of the intellectual or the aesthetic is arduous, but for Muslims, this tradition who practice the crafts such as the Islamic arts or calligraphy, poetry, or Quranic recitation, that craft provides them a model for Islamic spirituality. So this is the means to get to understanding, or to get to be able to perceive the archetypal realities, right, by practicing a craft. So a craft can be defined as an activity that requires continuous practice and improvement over a lifetime. But more importantly, a craft in our sense, in this sense, is towards the purification of our hearts in the attempt to follow the Prophet Islam's footsteps and the quest to know God, right? So it is a kind of a continuous practice and then a reworking of the self to actually to reach the higher reality and then eventually to God, to know God. And with that, the Quran also stated that, you know, if you don't know, right, ask the people of Zikir, and that is in the Surah Al-Anbiya. The practice of Islamic spirituality then being the science of taste, Zak, refines one taste, enabling recognition of spiritual truths and realities, Hakai, in sensible forms. Similarly, the Islamic arts also support and refine the practice of Islamic spirituality. So it is hand in hand, right? So the arts exist to support the the the, the kind of the sensible forms to of this refinement of the spirituality. Right? So the Islamic arts serve as a compelling gesture for the more profound realities of the tradition of insan and the purpose of essence in Islamic tradition, which is the highest art of bringing the human soul back to its fitra, which mirrors all divine names and qualities of the Jalal, the majestic, and the Jamal, the beautiful. So with that, we can see why Islamic arts is actually a kind of a outcome, you can say, but at the same time, it is also a process, is also a kind of means, right, to getting to the end of knowing God and higher reality. So it's not about getting to the beautiful, it is actually the process of getting there. And with that process, it is also the practicing of the refinement of one's self, right, the soul, and that will actually bring out the majestic, the Jalal, and also the Jamal. And we are preoccupied to identify, like almost like a binary, right? What is the Jamal, the beautiful, and everything else, it is opposite that. But you can see that the opposite of Jamal is actually a accompaniment, right? The Jalal is really not an opposite, a binary opposite as one would sort of like categorize it traditionally, right? So with that, I think there is the end of my sharing, and what other way to share, for us to reflect on this, to see an encapsulating cosmos of what then that leaves us to understand the beauty that goes beyond the built environment. We started with what is architecture, and I think I ended with the means to get into understand what beauty is, and what is beautiful is, of course, the means of knowing the self. So for one who knows himself knows God, and nothing is other beautiful than God himself, right? So I think that with that, I think we can open for discussion. And of course, I think it's just my humble sharing of my opinions and just and readings thus far.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Salam.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you, Faizan, for the sharing on yeah, a lot of really really deep stuff that we're going to talk about, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. I think this conversation that we've been having for the last few weeks is something that, as what both of you mentioned, it is a conversation that is still ongoing. It is not something that's set in stone or full stop, in the sense that it's building up on this vocabulary. So I think a lot of our viewers, and myself included, we are still learning from both of you in what you're sharing. And especially today was very interesting. You mentioned about a few things, but I wanted to, Dr. Faris, do jump in anytime. Can you,
Will do.
Bismillah. So I wanted to kind of like start out on what you mentioned about the Islamic arts emphasizing on geometry and calligraphy, on numbers and letters, and how Islamic arts does not mimic the outward forms, but it presents the inner realities. If let's say someone were to write a number in terms of geometry, or even write a letter that's in the outward form, in the inward form, how does that relate to how the scholars and the Islamic artists saw deeper realities? If let's say, how do they relate geometry and calligraphy of the outward with what is with their inward? Could you share with us? Bismillah.
Yeah, I think Faris, if you want to.
I'm processing. I
Yeah.
may take very long to answer that. Maybe you start first. I gather my thoughts. Maybe I can just jump in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it number one, it's attempting to understand, right? To even consider the things that you're considering before you make something, or you say something, or you do something. So yeah, I think your question is, how does the geometry manifest itself, and how one thinks about the geometry? Am I right, Brother
Yes.
Abu?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so number one, let's put ourselves in the shoes of a philosopher or a craftsman. All right. In an age where it is really drenched with thinking about reality, about continually trying to make connection to God, one is looking for the purest of vocabularies, or the best of vocabularies, to make the translation, right? So in this sense, across millennia and across tradition, the mathematical numbers and have become the best symbols to articulate uh, the perfection of godhood, perfection of cosmology. I'm trying to build this up because it's a wide topic. So um, and many things starts to reinforce this manner of thinking. Um, Firstly, if someone wants to understand mathematics, it is just not numbers dropping from the sky, literally, but numbers do come from the sky because one starts to understand uh, how time is, first of all, articulated and taught. And, and and the understanding of time comes from orientation. It comes from the cardinal points. So you see, slowly numbers starts to build up: 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4 cardinal points. Then the 4 cardinal points adds to the number 10, etc., etc. So that actually, I would want to speak about this later as well. I think Zan really brought this very important idea of knowing, having the knowledge to understand this. So when one starts to interpret the world, I think that's the key thing. One starts to, when one wants to find keys to know reality or know his God, naturally the notion of number starts to appear, right? And we can keep building this up, because if it has to do with time, it has to do with adab as well, knowing how a thing is placed in which order. uh, so we have things like proportion, things like symmetry, when would a thing appear, when a thing would not appear. So this is how knowledge of number or geometry became a privileged key to understand the secrets. And if I know I'm belaboring this, sorry, and I'm sure you got a lot of things to
Yeah.
say. Yeah, isn't it amazing that Ibn Arabi himself uses geometry as a way of teaching, right? But the thing is, there is a occultation, right? We don't know it because we are not in the inner circle to receive knowledge from him. And I'm really so happy that Zan, made this point again and again, that you need to be given access, you need to be taught, you need to want to learn to know about how these numbers comes about. Yeah. Again, I think, as with the last 3 weeks, I've not answered the question, but I'm trying to cope with something that is remarkably wide. But yeah, thank you. Maybe Zan, you can take it on from there.
MashaAllah. Thank you, Doctor. Maybe Zan?
Um, I think it is not so much of the outcome. I think the starting point has always been about. It always begins, and we have to really understand. It's not about outcome. It's what you begin with, and what you begin with is always revelation. You know, and with revelation, then comes a kind of effusion, a kind of a respect of what is then revealed upon you, and to receive that kind, you know, I wouldn't say revealed knowledge is a very, very important and and revered manner, and is the highest form of knowledge, right? And I think we can read it at a lot of levels, but it's not. You see, even numbers itself, it is really very complex. It's like, if you're looking, you can look at the algebra equation for the longest time, right? But it will hit you, and in this hitting you, right, in our context, is the revelation itself. You know, it is that receiving, and to receive, then you need to be um in your purest form, of course, right? So I'm just talking about it in a very general, metaphorical way, but I think we have in our tradition, you have to even to read revealed letters, right? To even read the Quran, you have to purify yourself, you know. To enter a mosque, you need to purify yourself. You need to be ready in body and soul, to sort of like accept that you're there. The placement, your locality, it's not about the building anymore. It's about you yourself. The sanctity of yourself is more important than the sanctity of the place. Then you try your best to not nullify your wudu, and so on, right? So those are the rituals I think we have not discussed, but we take it for granted. But I think that the rituals, I think in week 2 we did speak about what rituals makes a place sacred. This is one of them. You know, before you start the lecture, you take wudu. Before you enter class, you read dua. Before you start a prayer, and so on, right? Before you even eat a meal and all of that. So I think that is unique. So imagine, like, if you would go to a museum, next time you go to a museum to look at art, maybe take wudu, for example. No, it would change your perception of the world. And as Muslims, our perception of the world is different from everyone else. We always be the strangers, isn't it? Like, I mean, to digress a bit.
MashaAllah. Thank you, Zan and Dr. Faris, for the sharing on what you feel about the relation about the outward and the inward, where we were talking about numbers and letters. You in your talk, Zan, you mentioned about the work of Prof. Nakib Alatas, and also on adab. Simply put, to put things in the proper place, in the right place. Recently, I saw a photo of a group of people going to a restaurant, and unfortunately the restaurant is the shape of the table that they're eating from is the shape of a toilet bowl. And immediately when that photo was flashed to us, that sense of that's not at the right place, that sense of ugliness, this is wrong. And then it was really quite revolting and disgusting, and you really felt like something's wrong there. So maybe could you help us to could you share a little bit more about how people, or those the scholars in the past who focus on putting these things in the right place, how did they ensure, that their structures, or the how a person would enter the structure or enter the building would feel a sense of being put in the right place, or rather, that sense of, immediately when they see it, it's beautiful to their soul, rather than when you see it, it's something like, oh, this is not, something's not right here. How did they ensure that, or what were the things that they did in their design of the buildings, or even the gardens that they did, to ensure that, Bismillah.
Yeah.
I think again, for everyone who is listening as well, as Faizan has quite remarkably brought the session to a close, right? The more he continued with his presentation, the more objects started to disappear, right? And I think
True.
second or the third last slide, where I think Zan, you kind of, there was a paragraph, it was remarkable. I think the essence of what Islamic art was. I think if we keep a focus on that, then and Zan began the talk by talking about it, it almost becomes irrelevant to speak about historical buildings anymore,
Inshallah.
because
Mhm.
in a sense, um, there is no future of Islamic art or beauty. There is no now of Islamic beauty, and there was no past of Islamic beauty. It just always is, right? And uh, eh, for someone to participate in that, and Zan just mentioned it, you have to prepare yourself. Adab is not something external to you. You need to somehow or rather tune yourself, or attune yourself, or calibrate yourself. Thus, you have access to it, and then after that, through you, it could be shared with someone else, right? Um, so I'm also saying this because I cannot for sure say why a particular garden would have been designed in a way which, and I'll be very frank here, and it may sound very controversial, which may not be as good as what the botanic gardens is now. I don't know, right? Because I have not experienced that, and I am not so sure how I'm going to be experiencing the garden as it should be experienced. Just to pick up the point with Zan, which talks about the notion of the revelatory, it has to reveal something else to me, right? Something transcendent, right? So I think if we keep our focus to that, the notion of what is beautiful, and we're not even talking about art and architecture anymore. What is the beautiful in Islam? And it is in various dimensions: the material, the immaterial, and God, right? And through which types of tactics which we can deploy? Is it through poetry? Is it through a painting? Is it by the way we compose ourselves to eat tomorrow, what we wear, and then the building. I think this is where the conversation becomes more enriched. Yeah. So yeah, maybe Zan has left this.
That,
This yeah.
it was too
So
overwhelming, Doctor. What?
yeah, I
I'm sure he'll be back soon,
yeah,
inshallah.
yeah.
Doctor, I think when you mentioned about clothing and the conversation on its relation to architecture, I was reminded of the baju Melayu or the baju kurung, and how, for example, the Teluk Belanga, they will just have one button signifying unity of God. There is a certain meaning behind that, and another baju Melayu, you have like three buttons or three pockets signifying the three pillars of Islam, the pillars of Islam, and I think that that itself kind of like reminded me of what you mentioned, that for Muslims and beauty, everything that they do and wear has meaning. Maybe in your experience, in your study, Dr. Faris, how else has the Muslims or the scholars of Islam, kind of like created, or rather used the meaning that they understood in the things that they do every day in their clothes. Were there other permutations of such an example, using the meaning that they have into maybe their clothing or
Zan, you want to jump in or
Oh yes, I'm back. Sorry, I
he's
had to
back?
move. Yeah,
okay?
to move my
Um,
locality. I think on the other point, I was about to add on. Um, I think we have to also accept that Islamic art is not about provocation. I think the example you said is something that is um, it's quite a modernist take on things to provoke, and modern arts especially it builds up for that, right? To provoke the senses, to provoke a kind of rereading into a reading, right? But I think, as I mentioned in the lecture, it is not that at all. It's not about provocation. It's actually a pillar to support the act of knowing oneself towards knowing the creator of the self, and it goes into a rhythm of that, right? So it's I think we see it more often, but we see it lesser. And I think what Dr. Faris has also mentioned is quite immense, right? It has never been, it never is, and it will never will be. It's always there. It is just depends on who, which civilization to uncover, and so on. I think it could be read like that. It takes a rereading of rewriting of our history, and which lens of history are we going to adapt. But I think about implication of then the ambience, like what you say about the fashion and all that, the ambience of things, of use even the atmospheres of this being impacted. We can see that the outcomes of Islamic art at least is diverge. It can be very literal interpretation beyond cultures, but the fact that it is it is it is differentiated across, and that is the multiplicity in unity that Islam accepts that, right? And as Muslims we accept that. We can wear a jubah one day, and then next day you can go to the mosque and you can wear a kain songket, and then the next day you can also wear a kind of um, Arabic headdress, and then it doesn't really change your identity and your practice and your rituals as a Muslim, right? You can even wear a t-shirt and jeans for that matter, right? And it does not change the essence, right? And nor the fact that we negate those, we don't turn people down because they dress differently, and all of that. So it's part of a kind of a unique situation that we are neither any, and it is come to that point, right? You won't say that this is future Islamic fashion. it becomes quite a futile discussion on that matter. Three buttons or two.
Yeah.
So brother Abu, again, I'm going to answer your question by not answering it. So I'm going to like do this kind of like real turn here.
Okay, Bismillah.
So I think one of the key ideas that has kind of threaded through all our 4 sessions, and I have to reveal to everyone listening, me and Zan did not coordinate our lectures. So it's quite true. We always send our lectures a few hours before we spoke, right? And I think we are trying to make an appeal that when we think about the architectural Islam, right, it is not inconsistent with the other type of knowledge systems that makes up our faith. It is a continuity, right?
Mashallah.
In fact, it is a extension to what exists. It's like, so, Zan even alluded to I think jurisprudence, law, etc., as a kind of a basis to build and either describe beauty or make beauty, right? So if you really think about it, there are activities or there are events and atmospheres that God Himself tells us in the Quran to keep our eye on to understand His majesty, right? So that's where the ayats come in, right? So it's about the natural world, how things change, and nothing is mundane. I think this is very important because I owe an answer to everyone with the notion of the sacred and the profane, right? But it never exists because there are surahs, for example, named after the ant or the bee. So nothing is trivial, right? So everything has got a quality or essence to it. So the so there is a need or there is a knowledge one has to seek, right? From those who remember, right? Those who are knowledgeable to understand the world, to understand himself. And the reason we do it is we want to build a bridge to strengthen our relationship with reality, al-haq, which is God, right? So if we think along that order, then and architecture then, or I'm going to use architecture as an example. And if someone is with this mindset, the architecture he builds must add on to this. As Zan said, right? The architecture Islam or Islamic architecture cannot be provocative. It continues to build the bridge. So I'm observing the ayat. I'm trying to understand this. It is telling me something. I've been taught to read this. This will impact the thing that I am going to create, right? But this is when, and I've not really thought about this so deeply, and it's such an important thing, right? The thing that completely and comprehensively encompasses all order and all beauty is the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So if I am supposed to look at the cloud moving, the bee and the cow and the waves, as ayat to, to draw closer to God. And as an architect, these are some of the reference points with which for me to describe the majesty of God or the beauty of God. The Prophet has got to come in somewhere, right? And Zan, I don't want to commit this. This could be another lecture in 2022. I'm not prepared for it yet. But there's a whole chapter there, right? Okay, so I'm driving, Brother Abu, to this point because you asked me what have our scholars, right, have made comments about, guiding us through beauty. You spoke about the attire, etc. The only thing that comes to my mind is a shamai, right? The investment of, scholars to record every single detail of the Prophet, right? And this can only happen because there was a community of people who lived around him, for whom there was no ayat or no beauty greater than him. So all their time they were continually observing him and wanting that to be recorded, right? Sorry, this is where my thinking kind of stops because I've not made the necessary connections. But I think that there is, so if the Prophet now becomes a source, a knowledge system for me to draw from to teach me to make a thing beautiful, then what is that, right? Uh, I think the answers are all there because we have a very rich tradition with the ways our crafts, our artifacts have developed, and many of those who have participated in this, we know are from the Sufi traditions as well. The guilds were part of the Sufi traditions, and I don't have the knowledge of it, but there's some connections to be made to the Prophet. Yeah.
MashaAllah. Thank you, Doctor, for the clarification. I wanted to bring to the topic of beautifying things, ihsan. I think in the modern world, we have a lot of things that are very, how to put it, it's like a machine. You know, you produce crafts that are the same, they look the same, they function the same, and they're more so they're functional. But then you look at Islamic arts and crafts and architecture where they would take so long just to carve a small portion of the mosque with a certain geometric design, or even if you go maybe Morocco or Fez, you see how they make the chandelier, you know, and the stained glass, you know, and they really, it's very intricately designed. It's handwritten, it's painstakingly done with a lot of focus and precision, even in calligraphy as well. Why is it that the such artists, or you know, why is it that they devoted so much time in something that to create such beautiful arts or works of art, even though it, you know it does exhaust even their life's work, it exhausts a lot of time, but now generally the trend is we're moving away from that. We just want things quick, we just want to produce, and then it has to be functional. And if something takes too long, they probably won't do it, you know. Yeah.
Zan, I think this needs a Marxist reply.
Yeah. Or
I- I'll jump in first.
Yeah.
So I think the notion of making has always been an activity of giving dignity for a human being, right?
Inshallah.
Because of the use of our digits, the thumb, and then we can craft, right? uh, it is a way a human dignified himself in making anything. And I'm not just talking about craft, I'm even talking about simple things like agriculture. It's not easy, you know, we don't talk about these things. It's not mundane things, right? You need to understand how climate systems work. You need to go out there, do labor. So labor of the making of the hand was celebrated, and it was, and it's not only just in the Islamic tradition, in almost all tradition, the person who makes crafts, right, was celebrated. And this goes to the Latin quote you shared just now, Zan, ars nihil um, scientia. My memory is failing me here. Ars sine scientia nihil est, right? Art without science is nothing. And the science here, just to clarify for those listening, is not the science as we know now. It is the theory or the sciences which we have been talking about, right? With cosmology, knowledge about God, revelation, which was, you know, always very, very central, even in the Christian tradition. Uh, but that kind of cultural system, I think, has been devalued because products are made now mainly to exchange and then to build uh, uh, build profit, right? Build value, right? And I think this is a shift because we don't make anymore. In fact, we are celebrating things that we don't make, that we now have machine learning, right? It makes for us. It's a really, really remarkable contrast. We are comfortable to be doing the least. We are also comfortable
Inshallah.
to let go of our agency or authorship. So it is not limited to our own tradition, but it's, I think it's an ongoing global economic phenomena for about 200 years. Maybe Zan can add a few of his thoughts on this. Yeah.
no, I think there's 2 points to be made here. Is that we 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 have moved to a point that we can negotiate what simulacrum or the effects of simulations are. Right. It is not about it is so this is kind of unique, and I've sort of like studied this quite deeply into the effects and how the Islamic tradition deals with simulacrum or simulation. In fact, there's none. In fact, it falls into the realm of the false, because it's not the truth, right? It's not real. And whereas how we negotiate and how we navigate in our world right now is that we are fine with simulacra. We are fine with what is seen with simulation. It could be as simple as a produce, flavorings, right? Which is in fact is simulacra. It's not the real thing, and that sort of like evokes in our time. Even in the Quran, it talks about the real, the zat of things, the realness of things. Honey is honey. There's no other, and if we actually live, we live it, and we sort of like see it in what Faris is trying to allude to, right? In a prophetic way, or in a prophetic lens, is that actually revelation has never left us. The prophet has never left us. We are still, we're still in the time of the Prophet Islam, and this is something that we negotiate and we sort of like traded for simulation, the simulacrum of things, and that's why I think we are it's kind of hard for us to recover from understanding the tradition and why these signs we can't understand, because we have not tuned ourselves. In fact, if we talk about adab, right? Professor Said the part of adab is just a small part. The rest of the part is actually about the loss of adab. That's where his focus was on, right?
Yes.
So we are dealing with that part here. How come there's the loss of adab, the placement of us, which is still emanating from revelation. And if we were to build from that perspective, we were to design from that perspective, we were to breathe and eat from that perspective, then I think we can negotiate ourselves back onto that. I mean, it is something that I think what I find is that we can go around and around. How come this is not like that? How come this is like that? I think it's just because we are in that line of one segment of the looking glass, where if we reread some of these things, like what Ibn Arabi, Professor Said Nakib Al-Atas is saying, that is dealing with the exact thing, is placing ourselves back into the line of revelation and not losing track of it, because we can see the effects of it. Right?
Just to add one more point, right? So because matter in the pre-scientific world, I spoke about it just now, carried meaning with it, and it also had a relationship with the real. And it's also, I'm talking about many traditions. So if you chose a particular stone, right, the craftsman is just not, thinking of cutting the stone for a building. He's actually interacting with that stone because it is of a particular, there's a value to it, there's a story to it. And he's also giving dignity to it. He's giving voice to it, because after he finishes the work, right, it also now speaks to him and speaks to people, right? But we don't have this relationship anymore. So a couple of days ago, someone sent me an image and reminded, at least me, of the Prophet talking to Mount Uhud, right? I mean, who talks to mountains these days, right? And the Prophet spoke to things, If you call it things, did it mean things to them? I don't think so, right? It was alive. There is a sensitivity that was shared between the maker and the made, and the dialogue. And after the dialogue, what is then, recorded as a building, as a calligraphy, etc. So I don't know how to complete this, but when you invest this kind of, relationship with things, right, it speaks, I truly believe it speaks to a wider community of people. And you don't find that in mass-produced work, other than to call it's cheap, it's convenient. The terms we use are these things, right? And even the terms have changed because the vocabulary we have, or the relationship we have with materials, has changed. So maybe that's my last point on this. Thanks.
That's interesting, Doctor. Your last point in regards to how our language has been shaped, kind of by our environment, our built environment, and who we are as a person. I think that's very interesting as well. because then suddenly you start referring to, if what you mentioned that, oh, if someone does things in a shorter period of time, you know, you're celebrated, or you're productive. That's good. I was very productive today. I managed to do 10 things. But how many of those 10 things were you
Yeah.
very conscious of God, or remembering God, or in that moment it was a reflection of contemplation? And I guess the modern world kind of pushes you, I mean, the times now, it kind of pushes you to go quick. But is there value in also actually slowing down? Or is this something that, you know, what the people, the ancients knew, where they actually slow down so that they can have that contemplation, like what you both of you mentioned, that all Islamic art support purification of the soul, cultivation of character, and remembrance of God. You know, in a quick, fast-paced world, is what is the value of slowing down and, you know, contemplating on all these
I
things?
think essentially, I think we are conditioned to accept and think that time is productivity, while the essence of time is actually devotion. So I think Abu, you mentioned that, like it takes time to create beauty. It takes time to work towards beauty, and it takes time. In fact, time equates to this devotion of craft, right? To sit down and contemplate and find your place in this world, and it will be revealed upon you. Eventually, you'll be you will make good out of it, right? In devotion, of course, right? And the outcomes of it. I think Imam Al-Ghazali, right, mentioned about the importance of separating time for devotion, and everything else will be coming and be coming from there. And I think that is a very it takes a big paradigm shift, right? Take for example, like right now, all of us, at least up to the last month, we are the concept of time was thrown out of the window, and then we have to adapt to working from home and actually spending Ramadan at home
Inshallah.
and all of that,
Yeah.
right? So that is itself is a kind of a rethink and a paradigm shift in a lot of these things. And if only if only we had time, because the emphasis was different. I think time
Yes.
should be about devotion, and
Inshallah.
I think time is the greatest gift, or at least the awareness of time, right, is the greatest gift that for a mu'min to realize. And how to realize that is actually by the practice of everything that we should.
Inshallah.
I think it's very hard to compare our experience of time, which is scaled to the seconds, the minutes, the way we make it into a fracture, which
Yes.
really supports the modern economy, right? Because we just spoke about it. We can be very precise about it. We can account for what work can be done. And this time actually does not end. It is ceaseless. The days and night does not matter.
Mm.
It's just a continuity, right? Because the overarching thing is production must be always ongoing, and that production is of the horizontal plane, is the material plane, right? And I don't think we have the vertical time anymore. So this is another way of answering the sacred and profane, which yeah. But whereas I think in another time and another age, the vertical time was very powerful, and it exerted influence on cultures.
Mm.
And because the presence of God was revealed at different junctures of the day or within a year at different times. Um, so I think Zan has really covered this very well. The only thing I thought I wanted to just speak about is for us to better understand the kind of relationship with our time is to think of Ramadan and outside Ramadan. That's it, right? There's something that happens to us with relationship to time,
Very true.
where somehow or rather in Ramadan, uh, we find an expansion in our time to do certain things, which somehow or other does not reveal itself outside of Ramadan, where we some magically are able to control time or
Yes.
expand
Inshallah.
time or extend time, right? Uh, and perhaps if we have this mindset, to think about how it was back then and how we're negotiating this now. I think that's one way to think about it. But in the modern world, how are we going to negotiate this? I think this was your question. I think how to pause, etc. So
Yes.
one way is the Ghazalian way, right? Actually, to spend time to actually set aside time in the I think at the end of the day, you will say, at least for reflection. But then again, does that mean we cannot have a duality of time? That even in work, that we are able to have a mindset which is connected to a vertical timeline, right? So because God consciousness never leaves us, right? I mean, if you want to talk about in that realities, there could be multiple realities. So not easy, but I think the simple answer is there's some sort of a discipline for us to be had with how we view time every day. Yeah.
Inshallah. When both of you talk about time and talk about reflection, and also when Doctor spoke about what he mentioned about that, you mentioned about how the significance of the Prophet ﷺ is really what transformed everything. And I got reminded of the stories of the Sahaba who would approach the Prophet ﷺ, and then just in a short moment with him, their lives would never be the same again. For example, maybe Sayyidina Salman al-Farisi traveled so far, and then he finally got to meet the Prophet ﷺ, and he was very eager, and how the Prophet ﷺ, he put significance in things that at first initially didn't have the same significance. For example, if he were to touch a certain tree, if he were to walk in a certain street, he would purify that place, he would beautify that place, and now that has extreme significance because now you're walking where the Prophet used to walk, or you will climb up Mount Hira, and that is actually where the Prophet ﷺ used to be, in that cave, right? So in that sense, he beautifies things, and he purifies it. And and I would say definitely, Doctor, I definitely can see where you're coming from when you're saying that the presence of the Prophet ﷺ is what what beautifies, and what it's like a flood that just overwhelms everything,
Flood.
mashallah. And I think that's very beautiful. And and to me, when when listening to both of you speak, it really it's telling me to just try to link everything back to the Prophet ﷺ, to find how there is beauty in that. Like, and even Doctor, when you mentioned about when they were talking about the clothes and all that, you mentioned that they wanted to link everything back to what the Prophet ﷺ taught them, which was like even they call it not cekak musang, the teluk belanga, right, which is one button. One button represents unity, which is what God taught us. So you see, they were always thinking back. So I don't know. Yeah, is this something that we need to cultivate more
I
of?
didn't
How
know
do we
about
do
the
it?
one button as well. And did you say Teluk Belanga? Is that
No,
first?
yes, butang teluk belanga, just one.
I'm learning
I,
new things
I
today.
saw
Really.
a meme on it, so yeah, I'm just
Okay.
yeah.
And you mentioned about the three buttons, or three
I
pockets.
believe it's 5. So the 5 pillars of Islam.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So how
Like,
there's the Samba Jukong we have 5. So I felt that was quite interesting as well when I first heard it. Like, okay, that's quite interesting. Yeah.
there's another project for me and Zan too. No, it's
So
very
we know
interesting.
together.
I didn't know about this. I may have worn all of this without actually knowing there is real significance to this. Really, thanks for sharing. I didn't know. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I just saw it online, the poster that they were saying. I find that was very interesting as well. But yeah, in that sense, maybe let's draw to a close, towards that close, inshallah. We've had a conversation with both of you for the past few weeks, and Dr. Faris, you began with how God, the cosmos, man, and architecture are all connected, right? And how they saw God through the body of man, and the forms and functions, and so geometry. You mentioned about ratio, about beauty, and then Zan also, you mentioned about about space, and Zan mentioned a lot about this conversation, having a
Mm,
vocabulary
mm.
to speak of. Perhaps in closing, what would you say to our audience, or what would you share with our audience, what would you recommend, a way for all of us to look at the world right now through the lens of architecture, from both of your experiences? How can we do that? How can we have this new lens, a new set of eyes to use the vocabulary that we've learned over the past few weeks, to use this lens so that we can see things in a new light. How can we do that? So that we can end it with something that we can actually do, inshallah, or reflect on. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll go first. So
Bismillah.
I think my answer is not specifically about architecture anymore. So even when I presented, I think my focus was on on how knowledge that we have, right, that supports Islam in so many ways, or not supports the way Islam teaches us through knowing our relationship with God, and specifically, the pillar of prayer, right, with which we set our space almost in a daily way and seek our orientation. What that teaches us about ourselves, because we're in conversation with God, and then we are also responding to some type of cosmic diagram, and I think I was alluding to that in my conversations. So there was nothing really significant about a particular building or an aesthetic as it is. And I'm saying this because I thought Zan's presentation today was just really remarkable, and I think it continued to press on the point of seeking knowledge to understand, right, what beauty is. And and he also deflected away from the built structure or the made object. I think fundamentally you need to inculcate within yourself, uh, you know, uh, a way, or as you mentioned, a lens to think about the world, right?
Yeah.
And I think the lens need not be studied in architecture school. I think that really augments you. But as Zan mentioned, it's about a purification of yourself, right? And through the processes of revelation, being taught by somebody, being led in a way, going through a particular type of training. So you make that individual, and the individual, when he's taught the craft of architecture, would know how to behave because he has adab. He will know how to deal with matter, with space, with orientation, with his fellow beings, knowing full well that whatever he's going to create is another ayat that he has to produce as a lens to reveal majesty and beauty, right? So this is one thing perhaps I wanted to, kind of leave the audience with. The second bit is a little bit more technical. And again, if anyone is listening, right, this should be of some interest. And many times, Brother Abu, you've asked us question about contrasting the modern condition, like the toilet bowl as a table or whatever. How do we compare time now and time back then, etc. The thing that has become of things that are beautiful, the art and architecture, is uh, uh, since at least the Enlightenment, mid 18th century, art has become not so much of epistemological lens. It's not something you use or think about to know the world. It's become devalued, right? It's devalued. Is very interesting. It became aesthetic, and it has become psychological, right? So you say things like, "Oh, I feel it's beautiful," right? It becomes subjective, uh, and that is also has to do with the devaluing of the sacred. The sacred has now, it's not in the realm of truth anymore. And I spoke about it. When people, in the modern world, in the scientific world, want to understand the truth of the worlds, no one rushes to revelation, and they're interconnected. All right. What I'm coming to is, and this goes back to Zan's lecture again. We need to think about beauty ontologically. That means it has a value for us to understand the deepest of knowledge of ourselves and the other truths that come to us, the cosmos, God, etc. Right? Uh, and it is an intellectual pursuit that needs training, that needs guidance, that needs seeking, and it's not merely psychological or emotional, right? So if we divert the lens in this way, I think our vocabulary to understand or to practice any sort of craft, right,
Mm.
uh, would be much richer. And if we truly utilize the tools that are of our own tradition, starting with the Quran, the revelation, and the Prophet, right, as a basis, then we can build up our relationship with beauty. And finally, beauty is capital B. I'll just stop there because it is not something that is added on, right? It is really seeking something that is profound and fundamental, that gives meanings to our lives. Yeah.
Mashallah.
Thank you. I will leave Zan to take us to the crescendo right now.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I think just to add on, I mean, I'm still, of course, learning and part of the process as I go with this, right? Takes hoping and wishing that it will take me somewhere. But I think over and all, what I've realized in putting this together is to to align oneself, is to also recognize that whatever you perceive, that you're also being perceived,
Mm,
and that humility and that humbleness of the seeker, right, of a person, uh, or an adib in that sense, in the sense of lecture, uh, it is all accountable at the end. We will be accounted for, and I think if we occupy ourselves with this great tradition of seeking the creator within
mm,
the creations, right, and um, occupy ourselves with the beauty and immerse ourselves with the good people that surrounds it. Be
mm,
of course the good represented by uh, Prophet Islam and his family and his entourage, and the best people that comes after him, and our teachers and our leaders, and that will guide us rightfully so, right? And hopefully one day we will really be in the presence of the Majest, right? And I think that is something for us to hope for, and I think that's something for us to aspire for as Muslims, and in this tradition, in this uh, in this aspect of aspiration, at least, you know, if that's the one takeaway that I've learned, uh, that this is the quest. Then the quest only begins, right? And as what Dr. Faris said, it is not of the previous, it's not of the current because it's ever changing, and it's not of the future as well. It is actually everlasting, right? And to be reunited with the everlasting as well. I think
Mashallah.
that's the hope. Yeah.
Well said. Well said. Thanks,
Mashallah.
Zan.
You
Yeah.
actually reminded me of what some of the scholars would say that for the sincere ones, every night for them is malam Lailatul Qadr, and every day is for them is a Ramadan. So they
Mm,
they didn't wait
Sure.
for a certain time because Allah is with them all the time. In that you mentioned about everlasting, right? That you wait now or later. Now is the time. So I think it's really interesting and very beautiful. And it relates back to the connectedness of everything and even time itself. When is the right time to do something? When is the wrong? When's the right time to turn back to Allah? Right. So I think it's very beautiful, and I think it really relates back to the first lecture that Dr. Faris mentioned, which is the connectedness of everything, God, architecture, and the divine and the cosmos.
mm.
And I believe, Alhamdulillah, inshallah, everyone has benefited from the series of lectures, and we would like to thank both of you, Dr. Faris, and as well as Faizan Shah, on the time that you spent, and also the research that you shared with all of us, because I believe that the material that you're sharing with us is for usually typically a niche students who learn architecture. So yeah, we would like to thank both of you for the
Thank
time.
you.
Yeah,
Alhamdulillah.
and may Allah bless both of you and increase both of you.
Ameen.
Inshallah, may Allah continue this work. We never know, we might have another class, inshallah. And
Sure.
with that, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. Yep, inshallah, till next time. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi
Thank you.
wabarakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
All right. Okay, Alhamdulillah, guys, we've come to the end of the series of lectures on the history and theory of architecture Islam, the body, image, and spirit of place by Dr. Faris Haja Maidin and Faizan Shah. We hope that it has benefited you in some way or another, perhaps to ignite your senses in the sense of maybe it points you a certain direction to start thinking about life and things, or maybe it has allowed you to see certain lessons you can immediately practice in your life, or maybe it has helped you in your research, and with that, we hope that you will continue to pray for us in our work. But before we end, I'd like to make a quick announcement that we are still continuing our efforts to build a hospital in Senegal, and the link is actually on your screen. It's www.launchgood.com/Senegal Hospital, right? There's a shorter link, bit.ly/Senegal Hospital. That's bit.ly/Senegal Hospital. Inshallah, this is going to be a hospital built in West Africa, Taiwanese, community of about 20,000 to about 30,000 people. And we have heard stories of mothers who face complications because they are pregnant, and because it takes about 2 hours to reach to the hospital, by the time they reach, they face complications with their pregnancy. And inshallah, this hospital will be able to help a lot of people, benefit a lot of them. And also people who need hospitalization, inshallah, this medical aid will provide benefit for a lot. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did mention that one of the things that continue after we pass away is a sadaqah jariyah, and this is a sadaqah jariyah. We hope that you will join us and we hope that inshallah the efforts will be blessed. And with that, before we end, please pray for our volunteers who work tirelessly behind the scene to bring you this live lecture, and also our directors Sidi Khalid and Saida Ainun. May Allah bless both of them. And even before we end, a quick last announcement: this long weekend, 7, 8, 9, 10 of August, South Ilahi is having the South Ilahi Muslim Arts and Film Festival. South Ilahi Muslim Arts and Film Festival. It's happening from the 7th of August. So we have a whole lineup of local and international artists, poets, lyricists, writers, scholars, and we're going to feature films that are exclusively shown on our Facebook Live, and which if you want to get it, otherwise you have to pay for it. So we really hope that you join us. You take a look at the itinerary for the program, or the program for the 4 days. Inshallah, may be of benefit. And inshallah, the proceeds will go towards the hospital project as well. And with that, thank you so much for joining us. Till the next program. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.